Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, we're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally as important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else. Not in the media and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Welcome to another edition of Illinois Rising. Dan Proft, and my co-host this week is co-founder of the Illinois Opportunity Project and president of the Liberty Justice Center. So many titles. I'm so impressed. He is Pat Hughes. Pat, thanks for being with us.
Dan, thanks for having me in all my titles.
So we'll get to all kinds of electoral business momentarily, but first, this very interesting story out of New York that has great relevance to Chicago because if Chicago does something, if New York does something stupid, then Alderman Ed Burke is ready to have Chicago do that same stupid thing right away. And what New York did is ban apartment rentals of less than 30 days back in 2010. But a new law advanced by Governor Andrew Cuomo out there applies a fine of up to $7,500 for simply posting an available rental on Airbnb. Airbnb officials have filed a lawsuit in protest of this law, but I understand New York likes their rent control and their hoteliers, but this is relevant because Chicago's done the same thing. Done the same thing with instituting a very restrictive home sharing ordinance that runs in contravention of this dynamic economy we're living in with the likes of the Airbnbs and the Ubers and whatnot.
Yeah, there are terms that are always thrown about in sort of political discourse, and crony capitalism is one of them. People just sort of use it. It's alliterative, so they like to use it, and they don't take a second to realize that came to be for a reason, and that reason is, look, what's happening here is the hotel industry, in the case of Uber, the taxi cabs, in the case of food trucks, the restaurateurs who have brick and mortar restaurants, they are trying to use the legislative process, the power of the government, to restrict their competition. And that's exactly what seems to be happening here.
For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Jared Meyer. He's a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. He's also the author of the book Uber Positive. I see what he did there. Why Americans Love the Sharing Economy. Jared, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So this rather punitive law that Andrew Cuomo signed as it pertains to Airbnb, how does this play out in New York, and what was the impetus for it in the first place?
What we're going to see is a massive decrease in the amount of listings on Airbnb in New York, because what the law did was create civil penalties for listing in a home or an apartment on Airbnb if the host isn't there. So if someone's traveling for business and wants to make some money on their apartment while they're gone, they're no longer allowed to do that, or they could face up to a $7,500 fine. And the idea of the law was that it was going to help make housing more affordable in New York. But the numbers just don't bear this out, and the law was all about protecting special interests.
Yeah, so this is just the cartel protecting the cartel, right? This is a way to limit competition so hotels can charge higher rates than they would otherwise be able to charge if you had homeowners able to use Airbnb and other like services.
Yeah, and you see the average hotel price in New York is about $260. And I was looking on Airbnb the day that the law was signed, and I could find places for $50 for a shared room. I mean, what opponents of Airbnb fail to realize is every Airbnb stay isn't just one less hotel stay. But by creating more options and more levels of pricing and amenities, Airbnb and other short-term rental sites expand that proverbial pie of people who are able to travel. Not everyone can afford a $260 a night room in downtown Manhattan.
Yeah, Jared, it's interesting. Obviously, this law, like you mentioned previously before, that there was some pretext to it, right? They always have pretext. Is there any way to connect the dots between the law being passed and the lobbying that was done by the people who own the hotels to connect them to a city council person or to the governor or to a state legislator or whomever, so that the folks there who are not being able to buy a $50 a night hotel room can see how this connection comes place? Has anyone done any investigation with that?
Well, I think what's interesting, I know one state representative from the Upper East Side in Manhattan, which doesn't even have any hotels, still was one of the primary leaders of the anti-Airbnb bill. So I think you also see a whole lot of not in my backyard sentiments that all this opposition isn't just coming from hotel interests. But we do see the head of the lobbying group for hotels in New York even said this bill's great. It protects us. Like, he actually explained exactly what all of us have been arguing, which is that these anti-Airbnb bills aren't pushed to protect consumers or keep rents down. It's pushed to protect the hotel interests and also just people who don't want Airbnb and new services operating in their neighborhood.
Yeah, but should this come as a surprise to a city that thinks rent control is a good idea?
Well, you're getting to the point right there, which is that Airbnb is being blamed for high rents in New York City. I mean, this is comical. How can you possibly claim that a service that really didn't pick up until about 2.5 years ago is responsible for high rents in New York, which goes back decades to the modern rent crisis? But rather than trying to update their policymakers, they don't want to take the blame, so they shift it to the new guy in town. And if you look at the numbers, there's about 40,000 active Airbnb listings in New York each night, yet there's 3 million residential homes in the city. So about 1% of available housing is listed on Airbnb, and 90% of those listings are people's primary homes. So the idea that, let's say, 0.1% of available housing is being taken off the market, and that's the reason for our rent, there's no way that that's an actual argument, yet it's being pushed by opponents.
Jared, is there any push by people who want Airbnb there, other than people who want the inexpensive hotel rooms? Is there a tourism lobby or someone who thinks there's positive economic impact for people to be able to travel into New York and stay in those cheaper hotels? Have there been arguments made on the positive side that this actually benefits commerce in the city, in the state, and that it should be allowed on that basis?
Yeah, and it benefits different neighborhoods. Rather than where hotels are usually all grouped together, Airbnbs are all over the city. So one of the reasons I like using Airbnb when I travel is rather than staying by Times Square and having to walk around with all the other tourists, I can stay out in Brooklyn or the Lower East Side or somewhere where I'm not going to be able to find a hotel. Yet tourists are pretty much they're an unorganized group. Even though you have New York having different centers trying to promote tourism, when it comes to Airbnb, they're being silent and not bringing up the benefits that extending options has for local economies.
But Chicago and New York, are they so much with their finger in the dike with respect to the share economy? And Austin, too, Austin, Texas, with respect to essentially kicking Uber out, that they're just not going to be able to hold back the tide of the share economy when it comes to so many services, not just housing or transportation.
Yeah, you see New York State, for example, outside of the New York City area, there's still not Uber or Lyft. They don't have ride sharing because they keep trying to push burdensome bills that other states and cities don't have, yet are able to have these services operate perfectly safely. And in New York City, they tried to cap the growth of ride-sharing companies at 1% a year and then had to back down after a public backlash. But you see these so-called hip cities. San Francisco fits in there with the restrictions they've tried to put on Airbnb. They're trying to limit innovation, and I really think it shows that there are certain cities that are welcoming the 21st century economy and all the options that it brings, but then there's other cities who just want to dig in their heels and protect special interests rather than doing what will help them grow and become a more vibrant place to live and visit.
Jared, I guess I'm wondering, where is the special interest in favor of it? In other words, I would think the restaurateurs or the retail businesses who would want more tourists in town, shopping in New York City, eating in New York City, right? Why are they not saying, look, we want as many people here staying cheaply as they can? That frees up dollars for them to spend money on our goods and services. And where's their lobby? I would think they would want that.
Yeah, I've been wondering the same thing. I mean, I just haven't seen a concentrated push from anyone besides people who use Airbnb to rent out their homes in defense of the bill. Maybe there's some people who, New Yorkers who don't rent out their homes, who use it when they travel, who just on principle want to support it. But I would really like to see local businesses driving this point forward that, hey, getting more people into the city, saving them money, this is going to benefit us, and you can't stand up for hotels and treat them better than you're going to treat our local restaurants in this case. So I wish that lobby would pop up maybe when they see the decrease in sales now that it's going to be harder to stay in Airbnb in New York. Maybe they'll come around to it.
Now, we've seen a lot of bad ideas and a lot of anti-competitive environments in big cities with respect to ride sharing and home sharing. Are there any other forthcoming targets of the new share economy? What are they going to try and prevent from innovating next?
Well, we already had the FAA, the federal flight regulator, shutting down plane sharing, so that's gone. But also, we're going to see a lot of things butting up against state and local restrictions on healthcare provision as new services and increased connectivity make it easier and cheaper for people to have healthcare come to when they want it. So I'm just looking forward to those fights, because hopefully what we've learned from the fights over ride sharing and home sharing are that it's very obvious who the special interests are. But I think people need to do a better job of coming together when they benefit from these services and making their voices heard. So hopefully the special interests can be drowned out.
All right. He is Jared Meyer, Senior Fellow at the Manhattan Institute, author of the book Uber Positive, Why Americans Love the Sharing Economy. Jared, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks again.